U.S. officials and Ukrainian officials believe are a slow momentum that they believe could push into a Russian offensive come this spring. And so we've heard from U.S. defense officials that as soon as Congress passes a funding bill and the president signs it, they can get aid to Ukraine within a matter of days.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle, and I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, we still have a stalemate in Congress over aid to Ukraine. Obviously, we're a couple years into the war. Talk us through a little bit about where things stand right now.
So, as you know, President Biden reached out to Congress back in October and said, I would like you guys to pass this. It was about more than $100 billion worth of a supplemental funding package that included about $60 billion for Ukraine and about $15 billion for Israel. And so when you think about it, this request was initially sought by the administration back in October. We're now in February. Mm-hmm. And so months have passed. DOD has not been able to provide Ukraine with military aid since the end of last calendar year. So we're now coming up on 2 months since the U.S. has been able to provide military aid to Ukraine. And so we're now starting to see the effects on the battlefield. Ukraine recently lost or withdrew from the city of Avdiivka in eastern Ukraine. Now this, while the city itself is not an overwhelming achievement, it's the biggest tactical victory Russia's had since they claimed Bakhmut last May. And so this is almost the biggest event on the battlefield in the last year for them. And since they've taken it, they've also taken smaller villages nearby. And so they're really starting, U.S. officials and Ukrainian officials believe, are a slow momentum that they believe could push into a Russian offensive come this spring. And so we've heard from U.S. defense officials that as soon as Congress passes a funding bill and the president signs it, they can get aid to Ukraine within a matter of days. Now, that being said, it's unclear whether or not, there is significant movement on this legislation and how it could impact the battlefield.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has had his first congressional testimony since the whole controversy over his whereabouts while he was seeking medical treatment. What was the upshot of his interaction with the lawmakers?
So there was not a significant amount of new information that was gleaned during his testimony earlier today in front of the House Armed Services Committee. He faced a lot of questions about the timeline of his hospitalization, and to go over that a little bit with you is he was diagnosed with prostate cancer in early December, was treated for it on December 22nd. At that time, he signed over his authorities as Secretary of Defense to the deputy for the surgery. Ultimately, he went home the next day, reassumed his authority, and then was transported by ambulance with complications from that on January 1st. Now, on January 2nd, he was moved from the regular ER, essentially, to the intensive care unit. And when that happened, according to what we now know from the Pentagon, his aides realized that he no longer in the ICU had access to all of the communication technologies he needed as secretary. So at that point, they initiated the transfer of authority to, again, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks. Now, this all happened on January 2nd, and she was notified of it then, but they didn't say why she was getting this authority, because it's not uncommon for Secretary Austin to sort of give up his authority. It happens oftentimes when he's traveling to see troops.
Sure.
And, they're on a helicopter ride to a Navy ship that's out in the water.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily uncommon or nefarious when that happens, but at the same time, we're now seeing processes and policy changes as a result of what happened, because it took 3 days for Austin's aides to notify the White House and Congress and the public that he was in the hospital at all. And so...
But Austin testified that he didn't direct anyone to conceal his whereabouts.
That's right? And that's what an initial Pentagon review found. Mm-hmm. Now, there's a separate Department of Defense Inspector General report looking into this that's yet to be released, and that's sort of the last investigative look that we believe will happen into Austin's hospitalization. That being said, He was hospitalized again in February, and during that hospitalization, the Pentagon notified Congress, the White House, and the public all on the same day. And so it does represent that the policies they put in place after the January hospitalization actually worked for the February one, and most likely will be in place moving forward.
So there's been a lot of talk about a potential ceasefire, hostage deal, trying to get back the hostages taken by Hamas. Get us up to date with what's going on in Gaza.
So we believe, let me back up. President Biden said this week he believed that a ceasefire agreement could be reached within about a week from when he said it. Mm-hmm. Now, he started to walk back his comments a little bit, in part because some of the other parties of the conflict were not as optimistic as he was when he made the comment that it could happen as soon as next Monday, is what he said.
Yeah, and he'd also won the Michigan primary by this point.
Yes. And so a big part of the current situation is there are more than 1 million Palestinians currently in the southernmost city of Rafah, which is on the Gaza-Egyptian border. Now, all of those people fled to Rafah at the instruction of the Israeli military, because the Israeli military said, evacuate your homes in the north because we're going to be operating here and you should stay out of the battlefield. Now, the civilians fled south, but obviously Israel, needing to carry out its military operations, started moving south as well. Mm-hmm. Now there's no place left for all of these Palestinians who fled their homes to move, because they're facing a southern border with Egypt, and both the U.S. and a number of Arab nations have said they're not willing to see the displacement of Palestinians outside of Gaza. Right. And so the Israelis have said they plan on going into and conducting out additional operations in Rafah starting in mid-March. Now, both the U.S., the UN, European countries, Arab countries all across the globe have said if Israel carries out full-scale military operations without fully accounting for the civilians in Rafah, we could be looking at devastating consequences of civilian casualties. And so President Biden and his administration has said they would not support full-scale Israeli military actions in Rafah without fully accounting for civilians. And so we don't exactly know what their plan will look like. And we've heard repeatedly that the U.S. administration has not yet been informed of what the Israeli plan will be.
So is this a sign of renewed tension between the Biden administration and Netanyahu's government?
It could be, but really what it is it's a sign that the parties are still not quite there for a ceasefire, mm-hmm. because the Israeli sticking points and the Hamas sticking points are unresolved. Mm-hmm. And we've yet to see clear indications that there's a pathway forward from these unresolved sticking points.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at WashingtonExaminer.com.